Let's talk about the laws of the Old Testament and how we read those well. In some ways, they are as foreign to us as any part of the Bible. It's hard for us to identify with certain laws. Some laws are very familiar, Ten Commandments, but there are other laws that seem very strange to us. So talk to us first of all about how the laws fit into the grand story of the Bible.
Okay, you recall, the Israelites are in Egypt in slavery, and God comes, this time of Moses, Charlton Heston, and Ten Commandments. You remember the movie? Okay, God delivers them out of Egypt and brings them into the wilderness, and at Mount Sinai enters into a covenant relationship with them.
And covenant
Okay,
means...
covenant's an agreement, okay, where God has said that I will be your God, you will be my people, I will dwell in your midst. These are the main components of the covenant. And then, as part of his promise, he carries them over into the promised land and leads them into the promised land. Now, as part of the covenant stipulations that he gives in Exodus, in Leviticus, in Numbers, and then especially in Deuteronomy, these are the terms that God gives them by which they can live in that promised land with him in their midst and be blessed. And so as part of the arrangement of him being God and him blessing them, their side of the commitment is to obey these laws and keep these laws. So it's a very specific situation, time in history. The law didn't just drop out of heaven as a universal law for everybody for all times. It's given to Israel in this specific historical situation, and the terms by which they can live in the promised land with God in their midst and be blessed.
Okay, there are two parts that you mentioned there. The laws then in some way have to do with their context in the promised land, and the laws also relate to God's presence among them. Can you fill those out with examples just a little bit?
Yeah, the presence of God is a huge part of the whole arrangement of why the law comes and how they have the law. God enters into this covenant at Sinai and then says, I will dwell in your midst. And so this is huge. This is not just a God be with you kind of thing, but that actually in a very real sense, the holy, awesome, powerful God comes and dwells in this tabernacle. It's the whole second half of Exodus, really, is about constructing the tabernacle, how to build the tabernacle. And God comes in and then, dwells in this tabernacle. Just, if you're an Israelite, then just down the street, there in your midst, there's God actually dwelling there.
So I think of Exodus 33, the cloud comes down on the tent of meeting, and Moses goes and meets with God face to face, and all the Israelites stand at the entrance of their tents, and they see the presence of God come into their midst. In fact, that is an explanation of why it was so sad when God said, as a result of the golden calf incident in chapter 32, I'm not going to go to the promised land with you. So to describe the crisis...
Yeah, the risk of losing presence was the
Right.
issue there. And so when the presence of God comes now, is there in their midst, now you have the holy, awesome, powerful, holy God living in your midst, okay? It changes everything. The question, how are you going to deal with him? How are you going to approach him? How are you going to fellowship with him? That's the next book, Leviticus. So after Exodus tells us how to build a tabernacle and what some of the basic tenets of the relationship are in the Ten Commandments, then suddenly you have Leviticus telling you, well, what about sin? If you have the holy, awesome God right there, then what about my sin? Or how do I worship him? They didn't have all of this. They've been slaves for 400 years. How do we worship God? How do we say thank you for what you've done? How do I atone for my sins? All of that stuff is going to be explained in Leviticus. And then God is also saying, you people have to be different now that I'm in relationship, that I'm here, that I'm living with you, then you will be very different from everybody else. And the law, Leviticus, Deuteronomy as well, is going to spell out many of those differences and expectations that God has for them as he lives there in their midst in the promised land.
So you have them being different because of God's presence, but they're also distinct by the way God instructs them how to live.
Yeah.
I think of the end of Exodus 33, Moses says, God, if you don't go up in our midst, how will we be distinct from all the people of the earth?
Right. It makes them unique. It was not a concept that the other peoples around had, where God is right here. and that this has then moral and ethical implications, because God has told them in this material, not only in the legal material, the law, not only how He wants them to relate to Him. Here's how you need to be holy, how you need to be clean, how you need to do sacrifices, all of these things. But He also says, here's how you need to treat each other. And that the horizontal aspect of how they relate to each other is equally important, as far as when God gives them, these are the means by which you live. You have to live in right relationship to me, and you have to live in right relationship to each other.